Lily and Bucky hosted the top horror podcast on the market today. A couple who has been married now for 3 years and took their love of all paranormal and occult to the next level by starting their horror podcast Lily and Bucky Talk to Demons. The two discussed everything on the podcast from ghosts to aliens and everything in between. Business was great, and to add a bit more of an authentic feel, they loved to record live at midnight. It created a spooky environment because Lily and Bucky were the only two in the entire building where their office was located. The office sat in the corner of a multi-level building. Once the sun set, it was admittedly scary for them to walk from their corner office to the other side of the floor where the elevator was located. The lights on the floor were always pretty shot and never really illuminated like they should have. All of the paranormal discussed on the show was mainly Lily's expertise, as Bucky did not really buy into the whole supernatural thing, but understood all the money that could be made in the field. So he played along with his wife's passion. On this night, they recorded their podcast as they did many times before, but the night took a strange turn before the end of the live broadcast. Bucky had just finished reading a scary story he had found online about a yellow room and some sort of dark presence. They discussed the story for a moment and decided to hit the switchboard for a couple of on-air phone calls, as was tradition at the end of the show. The first two callers were just generic fans of the show, praising Lily and Bucky for all their hard work and hours of entertaining content. But the third caller was different. Bucky sent the call through and greeted the caller with "Hello, area code 315. You're on with Lily and Bucky." The phone was silent for a moment, and then what followed was a low cackle of some kind. Lily cut in and said, "Excuse me, but can we help you with something?" The woman on the phone stopped laughing abruptly and immediately began to shout, "You woke it up. This is your fault. You were reckless, and now he is coming. You opened this door." The woman began to laugh and cry all at once until Bucky finally hung up the phone. Being the cool and poised man that he was, he laughed it off and continued with his normal rap to his podcast. Lily looked visibly shaken, but composed herself to say her famous goodbye, "Be safe, little monsters, and remember you never know who or what is behind you," and the podcast ended. After the show, Lily and Bucky began packing up all their stuff and getting ready to leave. They talked about the show and dinner ideas. Dinner was always hard on these nights because it was after 2 a.m. By the time they got out of recording, Bucky could not help but notice that Lily seemed to be a bit shaken up still from the show. "Are you okay, Lily? You seem off or something?" Bucky said with a bit of concern in his voice. "That last caller really freaked me out. Do you think we did something wrong? What door was she talking about?" Bucky looked at Lily with a look that showed he was perhaps getting ready to make a joke. He looked at her and said with a tone of arrogance in his voice, No, I do not think we opened a door," or whatever she said. "I think it was a lunatic calling into a horror show. Either she is insane, or maybe we just scared her, which means we did our job. Or maybe she is some idiot trying to scare us, and guess what? It did not work. This is why I hate taking phone calls. People are so stupid." Lily looked at Bucky, still a bit scared, and finished listening to the end of his rant. "Listen, Lily, I know you love this shit, but it's honestly crap. None of this stuff is real. People make up their own ghosts and demons in their head to scare them." Bucky sounded agitated as he began to slam some of the equipment while he was ranting to Lily. She just sat there and listened to him but could not get this lady out of her head. After his rant, they were both quiet for a moment. Bucky was just finishing shutting everything down, and Lily sat by the door waiting for him. Lily started to hear a faint noise from outside the door. It sounded like footsteps, but not human footprints. It sounded like hooves almost, like a small animal was out there. She leaned over a bit to listen out of the door. It was unmistakable. There was something out there running around. Her first thought was probably a raccoon, or something had broken in through a vent, but that does not explain the sound of hooves. Against her better judgment, she got up and walked into the dark hall and let out a gasp as she quickly covered her mouth. At the end of the hall looked as if there was a black goat. She ran back into the room and got Bucky's attention with a scream, "There's a goat in the hall." Bucky turned to look at his wife, and with a giggle in his voice said, "Sorry, what? Did you say a goat?" He laughed as his wife sat there in distress. Clearly, something was not right. "Please go check Bucky," she said with fear in her voice. He sighed, but of course, obliged his wife. Bucky walked out into the hall and saw no goat, but something did alarm him. He walked back into the room with a look of confusion and almost disgust. "Did you see it?" Lily said. "No, I did not see any goat or any other animal, but it does smell horrible out there, like something is burning or something." Lily turned as white as a ghost. Was it the smell of sulfur? She said almost in tears. "I don't know. I have no idea. Kind of like rotten food or something. At this point, Lily had an idea of what could potentially be happening. The lady on the phone, the goat, the smell of sulfur. She had feared that in their ignorance, Bucky and her must have opened a gateway of some kind to a demonic presence. She could not bring this up to Bucky, though, because he would just laugh in her face and not believe a word of it. He continued to pack up and then said, "Okay, let's get out of here." He stopped at the doorway, turned to Lily, and said, "Hopefully the monsters don't get us." She felt so angry that in that briefest of moments she almost hoped that a monster would take him just so he could believe. He walked out into the dark hall laughing and stopped for a moment. "Wow, it is freezing out here," he said as he turned back to look at Lily, who was now visually shaken up. Before they took another stop down the long hall to the elevator, they both were stricken still with fear when they heard screams coming from the distance. What the hell was that? Bucky said, now finally starting to believe something may be wrong. Lily could not say anything through the terror she felt. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged and opened. They did not see anybody, but the screams were so loud they fell to their knees and used everything they had to run back into the office. They slammed the door behind them and tried to catch their breath. Lily said, "I told you something was out there. We did this." Bucky, still trying to put a rational spin on the situation, said, "I bet that lady on the phone is doing this. Some elaborate prank. Well, the joke is on her. Luckily, we are not idiots. I will call the cops, and this will be all taken care of in no time." Bucky pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" The 911 dispatch said. "Yeah, hey, my name is and he was cut off by the operator saying 911, "What's your emergency?" Looking a bit confused, he began to speak again. But before he could finish, the operator cut him off and said, "We're sorry, but this line is reserved. Please try again later." Instead of a dial tone, he was then introduced to loud screaming on the end of his phone. He pulled away in discomfort. Something was wrong now. He turned to Lily and said, "Listen, we need to just run toward the elevator and get out of here. Something is not right, and I'm not going to try and figure it out now." Lily was frantic but felt the comfort in her husband's voice. Maybe she was not thinking right, but it seemed like the best course of action now. In a brief moment, while they were getting ready to leave the room once again, panic struck the young couple once more. The outside of the room was being pounded on. They could hear growling and very loud, impactful thrusts into the wall and door. No human could have been making this sound or this amount of impact. Lily began to scream, and all of a sudden, all the noises stopped. For the first time in what seemed like forever, it was quiet. Bucky turned to Lily and said, "We have to run now." Lily looked at her husband and nodded in understanding. Bucky kicked open the door and ran a full sprint to the elevator while holding Lily's hand. They'd banged on the down switch trying to get the door to open. "Oh my God," Lily said with sheer panic in her voice. "Bucky, look at that." Lily pointed to the office they just ran out of. In the doorway, shrouded in darkness, was something kneeling. They could see horns protruding from the head. As they stared at the figure, it stood up and must have been over 7 feet tall. It looked more beast than man. It was hard to make out in the darkness, but it looked like a goat head, with giant horns and wings that peered out from behind the creature. The door opened, and Lily and Bucky ran inside of the elevator, slamming on the closed door button. At that moment, the insidious creature began to run at staggering speeds toward the elevator and growling with every inch it closed the gap. The door closed, and Lily and Bucky were tossed back from the impact of the creature slamming against the elevator door. "What the hell was that?" Bucky shouted. "We were careless, Bucky. We opened something we should not have." Bucky turned to his wife and said, "I have no idea what just happened, and I can't explain it. But we're free now. We're leaving." The door opened, and they both froze. "No, no, 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 no." "What is this?" Bucky shouted. The door opened to a dark room. It was no parking garage, no room in this building. Bucky pulled out his phone to call the authorities again. While he was struggling with the phone, Lily walked outside the elevator. She walked about 3 steps and screamed. Bucky, in a panic, turned to grab his wife, and in the erratic movement, he knocked off his hat and dropped his cell phone. She was being pulled by something, but they could not see what it was. The haunting sounds of screams and laughter surrounded the two. Once Bucky stepped outside of the elevator, the door closed. Lily was let go by whatever was pulling her, and Bucky turned to try and open the door. Wherever they were, there were no buttons for the elevator, no stairs, no anything. 2 dim lights were all that were illuminating this small section of ground. It was freezing wherever they were. Lily fell to her knees and cried as Bucky just banged on the door and yelled for help. "Lily, We're going to freeze to death or worse if we stay here. We have to try and get out of here, Bucky said with some fear in his voice for the first time. Lily said nothing but got up and walked. Bucky followed her into the darkness. After a few minutes, they finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel, a way out they hoped. They ran toward the light, and as they closed in on the bright chamber at the end of the tunnel, they heard the large hooves smashing behind them. Once they got into the room, they stopped on a dime when they saw 5 hooded figures standing around an altar in the middle of the room with what appeared to be blood all around the altar and ground surrounding these hooded figures. Lily and Bucky tried to be as still as possible, but it did not appear to matter. The figure in the middle turned to the couple, opened his mouth to let out a sinister cry that did not appear human, and pointed to the couple. All at once and in a flash, Lily and Bucky were swarmed, and before they could make out what had happened, they were gone. The elevator opened the ground level to one of the building maintenance men. He picked up Bucky's hat and cell phone off the floor of the elevator, which was still connected to the 911 dispatch, saying, "Hello, sir. Are you there? This is 911. Is everything okay?"